Winding its way up the Columbia River Gorge, past towering cliffs and waterfalls and secret canyons, is the historic Columbia River Highway, which is the very first scenic highway in America, also known as the King of Roads. The excellent craftsmanship by the Italian stonemasons, who made the guardrails and other stonework, is still in evidence over 100 years later. The graceful arched bridges going over the creeks and canyons were intentionally designed to enhance the natural beauty of this magnificent gorge. There are very many different, alluring facets of nature enjoyed by the travelers of this highway. It was the intention of the designers to link all of them together and to create a masterpiece similar to the Oxenstrasse Highway in Switzerland. The man that brought together the resources and expertise to create this magnificent highway was an attorney for the Great Northern Railway named Sam Hill. He was a very charismatic individual, and it was only by his vision and tireless promotion of this project that resulted in the highway being completed. Sam Hill was also a promoter and strong advocate of the National Good Roads movement that was sweeping the country. He was continually working to raise funds for that cause, because most of the roads outside the city were nothing more than a mud track, and better roads were sorely needed at the time. This is a photo of Sam Hill at the historic gathering of men responsible for the funding and construction of the Columbia River Highway. In attendance is John Yawn, the man in charge of the project. Also present was Oregon Governor Oswald West and future Governor Julius Meyer, and Chief Engineer Samuel Lancaster. The man seated at the table with Sam Hill is Simon Benson, who was a significant donor and owner of the Benson Hotel. One very critical obstacle Sam Hill managed to overcome was to secure the support of the governor and the 1913 Oregon legislature. He accomplished this by inviting the entire legislature to travel by train to his estate on the north side of the Columbia River near Goldendale, Washington, where they could view the first asphalt road in the Pacific Northwest. It was built at his own expense by his chief engineer, Samuel Lancaster, over a 4-year period. He called it Loops Road, and it did convince the legislature to support the project. Having Governor Oswald West as an ally and supporter was a significant help to securing the necessary legislation, and he, like Sam Hill, understood the economic benefits that would be realized when good roads were available. Construction began almost immediately, and the methods were very primitive at the time. With World War I in progress and the resulting shortage of manpower, convict labor was considered a viable option, and was used extensively for the more menial tasks on the highway project. And here is Sam Hill bringing up the rear. Because Sam Hill wanted to emulate the style and quality of stonework found on the Oxenstrasse Highway in Switzerland, he hired a crew of Italian stonemasons. They built the stone guardrails, retaining walls, and other decorative stonework that contributed significantly to the elegance and charm of this extraordinary highway. The location of the stonemasons' original campsite was validated by Tom Connolly, head of the anthropology department at the University of Oregon.
One of the compelling reasons for believing that this particular construction camp was associated with the Italian stonemasons who were brought in to build the copings and railings and bridge structures for the Columbia River Highway was the presence of these domed stone ovens that were built by a lot of southern Mediterranean immigrants who worked on construction crews.
The workmen also used a small gauge railroad to move the rock and materials once the roadbed was in place, and they used a wooden mobile rock crusher to produce the gravel needed for the project. Construction was going on at a number of different locations at the same time: Moffat Creek, Tooth Rock, and many other places. However, one of the most unique undertakings was the construction of the Mitchell Point Tunnel, which was inspired by this tunnel in the Oxenstrasse Highway in Switzerland. For motorists driving through the Mitchell Point Tunnel, it was a very singular and captivating driving experience, and nothing to be compared with it anywhere in North America. The highway was dedicated on June 7, 1916, at Multnomah Falls. There was also another dedication ceremony going on at the same time on the top of Crown Point. Thousands of people came from all over the Northwest to witness this once-in-a-lifetime event, with a band playing, and a cannon was fired when President Woodrow Wilson unfurled the American flag by pushing a button in Washington, D.C. The highway was an instant success. Tourism and commerce began almost immediately. Shortly after the highway was opened, it was suggested by Samuel Lancaster, the chief engineer for the project, that an observatory be built on top of Crown Point. It was originally designed by the famous Portland architect Edgar M. Lazarus. It took 2 years to build and has been literally the high point for travelers on this magnificent highway from the first day it was opened. In 1914, Sam Hill began construction on a mansion overlooking the Columbia River on his estate, a short distance from Loops Road. It was designed by Washington, D.C. architects Hornblower and Marshall in the Beaux-Arts style and built of steel-reinforced concrete. He named it after his daughter Mary, pictured here with a friend on horseback, and he eventually decided Mary Hill would become an art museum instead of his residence. During his travels in Europe, he had made the acquaintance and friendship of Queen Marie of Romania and invited her to see the Columbia River Highway and dedicate his new Mary Hill Museum. She accepted the invitation and arrived in New York on October 18, 1926. She received a royal welcome by the mayor of New York, James Walker, and other leading dignitaries with a military salute and ticker-tape parade. After traversing the country and being received with equal fanfare in every city she encountered, her train finally arrived at the Mary Hill station on November 3rd. The Queen was escorted by Sam Hill and many other dignitaries, including the governor, up to the Mary Hill Museum for the dedication ceremony. The Queen donated $1.5 million in paintings and statuary. She also donated a cloth of gold gown she had worn to the coronation of her cousin, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, in 1896. Sam Hill spoke to the crowd of over 2,000 people, as did the Queen, who, during her speech, said, "There is a dream built into this place. Sam Hill is my friend. He is not only a dreamer, but a worker. So when Sam Hill asked me to come, I came with love." After the speech, the Queen released some carrier pigeons to carry the message of Mary Hill to other parts of the world. When the ceremony was over, Sam Hill had organized a motorcade so the royal party could enjoy the experience of the Columbia River Highway. Here, the Queen's motorcade is going through Hood River, Oregon, on the way to Portland, and having the same royal welcome she received in so many other cities since leaving New York. Traveling west on the Columbia River Highway from Hood River, the Queen's motorcade made a stop on the top of Crown Point and on into Portland to their destination, which was the Multnomah Hotel. Here she was guest of honor at a banquet hosted by Eric Hauser, the owner of the hotel. It was attended by Her Majesty, also Sam Hill, and her daughter, Princess Elena, her son, Prince Nicholas, and the royal party and many local dignitaries. A couple of years after the Vista House was completed, another significant attraction began being constructed along this new highway, when Simon Benson purchased a hotel in Hood River that he would rename the Columbia Gorge Hotel. He tore down and replaced the old structure, which had been named the Wal-Gwin-Gwin, which is a Native American term meaning fast-moving water. He also used some of the same Italian stonemasons that worked on the highway to embellish the grounds with decorative stonework. It very rapidly became an international success, and some of the hotel's notable patrons were President Roosevelt and President Coolidge, also actresses Myrna Loy and Jane Powell, and actor Rudolph Valentino. The next attraction to be built on the Columbia River Highway was the Multnomah Falls Lodge. It was constructed by the city of Portland on land donated by the Oregon and Washington Railroad and Navigation Company. It was completed in 1925. Like the Queen of Romania and the many travelers on the Columbia River Highway since she made her celebrated tour, all have been captivated by the towering cliffs and escarpments, by the numerous waterfalls, moss-covered stonework, and narrow hidden canyons. And from the very beginning, the public's fascination with this remarkable gorge has not diminished, but only appears to increase every year. Unfortunately, Sam Hill's magnificent highway hasn't fared nearly so well. This is primarily because of its popularity and subsequent overuse by the public and the trucking industry. In an attempt to address the problem, Sam Hill traveled to the Oregon legislature to speak to them about regulating the truck traffic. It was on this trip in 1931 that he fell ill and passed away 2 weeks later on February 25th. The highway's overuse persisted, and no plans were implemented to resolve the situation, and it was all put on hold until after World War II. Efforts to build a freeway to handle the ever-increasing traffic didn't begin until the 1950s, and it wasn't until 1963 that it was nearly complete. At that point, the historic Columbia River Highway became what Sam Hill originally intended. It is now used almost exclusively by tourists who come to enjoy the beauty of this magnificent gorge. However, some of the historic Columbia River Highway segments were no longer accessible, and some were eliminated entirely. The most disappointing was the loss of Mitchell Point Tunnel, where that segment of the hillside was completely removed. In this aerial photo with an artist's rendering shows you where the tunnel and the viaduct used to be. In the 1980s, there began to be an interest in Congress to try to preserve some of these national historic sites, which in turn fell on the shoulders of the states to implement the proposal. In 1986, Congress passed the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area Act, which directed the state of Oregon to restore and reconnect the abandoned sections of the highway as a trail. So a lot of time was invested in looking at how to design the walls, the specifications for how the walls should be built, and for making sure to hire the very best stonemason. This is Master Stonemason Michael Byrne, who's been used extensively by the state of Oregon in the repairing and rebuilding the stonework along the historic Columbia River Highway.
Well, in the gorge, they used what they call found stone, which was the stone right on the road. As they built the road and cleared it, they used the stone that came off that was there. If they needed something special, they got it out of the Rocky Butte Quarry, which has been closed since the late 70s.
There's quite a number of places throughout the gorge where new master stonework has been completed. The high quality of this masonry is as much an enhancement to the gorge as the original stonework placed 100 years ago. However, one critical part of the restoration of this historic highway was the renovation and reopening of Vista House on Crown Point. This is Chet Orloff, a professor from the University of Oregon School of Architecture.
The restoration began in 2001 and it was completed by 2006. And if you look at the damage up here, the ceiling has to be constantly reworked.
The Vista House was dedicated to the pioneers, and some of the more prominent individuals have their names inscribed around the top of the domed ceiling. Here is the name of Jesse Applegate, who was influential in Oregon politics and helped open the Applegate Trail, which was the southern arm of the Oregon Trail. Also Marcus Whitman, who established a mission and expended much time and energy helping the newly arrived pioneers by giving them assistance and supplies. Then there was Dr. John McLaughlin, who was declared by the Oregon legislature to be the Father of Oregon, and was a benefactor to many of those who had just arrived over the Oregon Trail. The Vista House is actually a world-class rest stop, with marble walls and floors, with brass handrails, and with historically significant displays and photographs. It also has a gift shop and espresso bar, and it has an outside balcony running around the perimeter of the top floor. Also, during this recent renovation, an elevator was added for the disabled so they can access the restrooms on the bottom floor. After the rededication presided over by Governor Kulongoski, the Vista House once again became the high point for travelers on this magnificent highway. On July 23rd, the Vista House played host to a historic vehicle convoy that would rival the one Sam Hill arranged for the Queen of Romania. From Model Ts to historic limos, 72 vehicles in all. After a brief ceremony, the convoy headed down the historic Columbia River Highway to enjoy the experience of the gorge exactly the same way as the Queen did on her historic visit. Riding in Edward DeVito's 1918 Hupmobile, you can see the views are spectacular. and the road makes a series of loops to bring it down closer to the valley floor. On this segment of the highway, you find Italian stone masonry on the left with towering cliffs on the right. Next, we're going to be crossing Shepherd's Dell Bridge that arches gracefully 100 feet above Young's Creek. The property was donated by George Shepherd, a man of modest means, as a memorial to his wife. After we round the next corner, we'll be crossing La Tourelle Falls Bridge. It was named after Joseph La Tourelle, a French-Canadian who founded the settlement of La Tourelle and was renowned for his skill with the violin. La Tourelle Falls itself drops 249 feet over columnar basalt. As we approach the area of Multnomah Falls, we see the design of the guardrails change to a more slender arched concrete style, as opposed to the heavy stone masonry that's found along most of the highway. This is Multnomah Falls Lodge. The falls was named after a famous Native American, Chief Multnomah of the Willamette tribe. You can see the falls in the background. It has a 542-foot drop for the upper falls and 69 feet for the lower falls. The next stop is the Oneota Gorge Tunnel. The tunnel was reopened in 2009 and is now part of the historic Columbia River Highway State Trail. We were allowed to drive through it, but normally it's only open for pedestrian and bicycle traffic. After a short distance on the freeway, the convoy stopped at the small town of Cascade Locks for lunch. Edward DeVito and Bruce Spainhauer make the decision to drive their vehicles over onto the Washington side of the Columbia River so they can drive them on Sam Hill's famous Loops Road. This road is also not open to the public and can only be driven on with special permission from the Mary Hill Museum. It was the smoothness of this asphalt road that so impressed the Oregon legislators into supporting Sam Hill's Columbia Gorge Highway project. After experiencing this fascinating part of Oregon history, Edward and Bruce decide to visit the Mary Hill Museum, which is only a few miles to the west. The museum is located on some well-kept grounds, high on a bench overlooking the Columbia River on the Washington side. Edward and Bruce are walking up the very same ramp used by the Queen of Romania's convoy when she arrived here in 1926. Inside the museum, they are treated to a tour of the facility by Mary Hill Museum Director Colleen Schifrot. They were shown this exact replica of the Queen's crown, this original oil painting of Tsar Nicholas of Russia, and the cloth of gold gown Queen Marie wore to the Tsar's coronation. After being shown a number of other priceless objects, Edward and Bruce decide to make one last stop before heading back. A few miles from the Mary Hill Museum, Sam Hill built another fascinating attraction on a hill overlooking the Columbia River not far from Loops Road. It's a replica of the Stonehenge found at Wiltshire, England, and dedicated to the soldiers of Klickitat County that gave their lives in World War I. If you walk down the hill on the south side, you'll find a path made of primitive stone steps leading toward the river. In a few hundred feet, you come to the place where Sam Hill chose as his final resting place. He fell in love with the Northwest. His family came but didn't stay, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. He now forever looks over the valley and the river and the rich heritage he left behind, and the heritage we'll continue to enjoy for generations to come.